or damage. And second, they helped fill the dizzy meter, a mechanic abused across all 16 fights in the game. If you punch an opponent a lot in a short period of time, an invisible dizzy meter starts to get filled. Do this enough, and they'll become dizzy and back away. By precisely timing a punch when they come back, they'll get knocked down instantly. This is used across the run to score quick knockdowns, and leads to most opponents being beaten in just seconds. Finally, there was one last step to this fight. A dizzy opponent has that window where they can instantly be knocked down. However, this window can be quite small, and it's easy for even a world-class player to miss. Fortunately, Zallard invented a way around that. Buffer strategies. By chaining a series of inputs together, it's possible to waste the exact number of frames you want so an attack will land on the same frame every time. For example, let's say Gabby J's knockdown window is between 120 and 129 frames after the dizzy begins. Well, it just so happens that a full duck, a right body punch, and a high super waste exactly 120 frames. So if you just buffer those inputs together, making each come out on the first frame possible, the super comes out at the perfect time to knock him down. Buffers like this exist on every fight in the game, and help make the dizzy knockdowns much more consistent. Non-random fights like Gabby J are usually pretty simple, but the difficulty level ramps up as the game goes on. Take Aaron Ryan, the 9th fight. The first knockdown is from a dizzy, but when he gets up, you have to precisely time a super to counter his attack and send him down again. Zallard didn't have a buffer to time it, but he nailed it to send him down for the KO. Those fights are non-random or close to it. Others include Mr. Hurricane, Mr. Sandman, and Heike Kagero. You get them dizzy and use a buffer to knock them down. Some have tough punches that have to be timed, while others are even simpler. That's the gist of the non-random fights. But then, there are the random fights. These are the fights that more or less define Super Punch-Out as a speed game. Not only do you need to execute properly, that's a given, but you also need to deal with luck. Luck that can range from a golden opportunity to potentially killing a run. Take Dragon Chan, the 6th fight in the game. The first phase of the fight, up until the first knockdown, is simple. You throw a sequence of gut punches, most with a slight delay before them, then use a buffer sequence to send him down. Phase 2, once he's up from the first knockdown, is where the randomness begins. There are 3 things Dragon Chan can do here. 50% of the time he does kicks, where you have to just dodge out of the way, then use rapid punches to send him down at around 12 seconds. 25% of the time, he does a slow heal, where he stands still and tries to heal his health. 2 supers send him down, and you get a time in the high 9-second range. And 25% of the time, he does a fast heal, where using just 1 super gives a time in the high 7s. That's a range of more than 4 seconds for one fight. Given that boxers are beaten in 15 seconds or less, that's a massive time swing. And Dragon Chan is just one example. Zallard had to deal with luck like this on more than half the fights in the game. But we'll get to that later. For now, the sum of his 16 fights came out to 3 minutes and 10 seconds. It was a well-executed run, and had a range of good and bad luck. Over the following few weeks in 2013, Zallard would keep doing attempts and chipping away at the record. He took it lower into the 3s, approaching the sub-3 barrier but falling just short. However, on March 19th, thanks to a couple fights in particular, Zallard had a very promising run. This is Bob Charlie. He's a gauntlet of RNG, and being the 5th fight in the game, he's the earliest boxer who can kill a run from randomness alone. Zallard went for the riskiest strategy on Bob, which involves hitting him 7 times in the face to get him dizzy. However, he can randomly dodge any of these 7 punches, meaning you have to do an additional punch later on to make up for it. He can also dodge that punch. So to get the fastest time on Bob with this strategy, all 7 of your punches need to go through, and a super in phase 2 needs to as well. It can lead to a time in the 5-second range. However, every dodged punch uses a second and a half. 1 dodge isn't too bad, but 2 or 3 or 4 dodges, your time can spiral in a hurry. Luckily for Zallard, on this particular run, Bob only dodged once, so he moved on with a very solid 6.99. Unfortunately, Dragon Chan gave kicks, so he failed to gain much time there. But thanks to some very solid execution down the stretch, Zallard was able to keep it close going into the special circuit. And it was there he had to face off against Hoy Carlo. Hoy is absolutely brutal. He's extremely random, and he's the 3rd to last fight in the game. Not an opportune time for a bunch of RNG. A lot of the first phase of the fight is playing it by ear. You want to throw punches and hit him with supers to get him dizzy. Of course, he can randomly block you, duck under punches, and potentially shove you to the side. If he shoves, it destroys your dizzy meter and can kill your run instantly. In phases 2 and 3, you need to throw supers to knock him down twice more. He can randomly duck under these. Each duck loses about a second and a half, or potentially more depending on his next moves. Now, in theory, if you play it risky and get no blocks, shoves, or ducks, you can beat Hoy in 8 seconds. But good luck with that. The odds in getting it were less than 2%. A 10 to 12 second Hoy is very solid, but it can get ugly quickly. If he shoves in phase 1, it can be impossible to beat him in under 20 seconds. As you can imagine, it's awful to have to deal with this at the end of the run. But this time, Zallard got some luck. An 11-second Hoy with no ducks. It put him ahead, and he never looked back. A 2:54 single segment run. Fantastic execution, great luck, and sub 3 by a mile. In the description, Zallard could only manage 1 word of analysis. Platinum. With the record being well below 3 minutes, Zallard would take a break from Super Punch-Out runs. He was the only runner in sight of the record. Months passed, and his 254 was just solidified at the top. But as good as that 254 was, Zallard knew he could still squeeze a bit more time out of it. And with all the randomness across the game, in theory, the record could come under 250. So in early 2014, he hopped back on and started doing attempts. On January 23rd, he had a run with an okay start. 2 dodges from Bob Charlie, and some mistakes that put him slightly further behind. On Hoy, he got a solid 12-second fight with no ducks, but some bad luck at the end brought the run back to nearly even. In the end, Zallard technically did have himself a new record. Just weeks later, he chipped away a bit more. He had a reasonable pace into the special circuit with time to save. However, he still had to get through Hoy.
1, 2. Yuck. Dick. 3 dodges.
Not exactly ideal. Even so, with time to save at the end, Zallard was able to do it again.
Fuck yeah! Another third of a second.
Now, these records were nice and all, but they weren't exactly setting the world on fire. In all, Zallard had lowered the record by 0.75 seconds. He knew he could do more. He continued with attempts, and weeks passed, but the game's killer randomness prevented any other records. It was starting to get very frustrating. And then came February 27th, 2014. This was an incredible chance for Zallard. Luck had finally gone his way. His execution had been on point from start to finish, more than 4 seconds ahead of the record. This was a rare opportunity to jump straight to the 240s. But in his way, there was one more fight. The last fight in the game. And this one was going to be tough. Nick Bruiser. Nick Bruiser is the most difficult fight in the run by a long shot. Just as with other fights, your goal is to get Nick dizzy and time his super to knock him down. The best way to get him dizzy is to counter him, then jab him out until the meter is filled and he backs away. Seems simple, right? Well, there's one extra consideration to make. Nick can throw his punch either high or low. There's a 50% chance of each. So you start the fight with 2 face punches, and then you have to react to which punch he sets up to throw. If Nick drops his gloves down, he's throwing low, and you counter with a body punch. If instead he brings them up high, you counter with a face punch. The window to react to this is just barely within the limits of the human reaction time. You have to see if his gloves are high or low, then send the signal to your hands to throw high or low in time before Nick punches you. If you're playing with any input delay, this is practically impossible. The only way to have a real chance is to play on console with a CRT TV. Now imagine having to do that at the very end of a record-paced run, after all the insane RNG from the first 15 fights. The pressure you're under in a situation like this is enormous. Nick can also switch